Oh, hey, Chris.
Hey Chuck, how are you?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm feeling it's weird. I'm the only one in our on our service that's not doing anything clinically today because we're recording on a holiday.
Yeah, we're definitely talking about you. I mean, we're like, pulling your weight. I mean, my gosh.
It's okay. January is a slow month, right?
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm usually in clinic today, and WashU clinics are canceled. But the hospital is open, and Dr. Wall convinced me to do some combo cases all day. So it'll be fun. But I'm a little envious of you, to be honest.
It's okay. MLK Day in the D household is the annual take down all the Christmas decorations day, and that's what it's turned into for us. So we've got some work to do today.
Yeah, maybe not so envious.
So any interesting cases recently?
Yeah, I do have one, which I think is worth at least a brief discussion. Um, it was a 65-year-old lady who sustained a distal radius fracture 7 or 8 years ago, and she was doing great, had no issues, and then all of a sudden noted that she couldn't extend her thumb. And she came to see me. I don't recall where her first surgery was done, and her hardware looked to be in reasonable condition, and she absolutely had an EPL rupture. So, I think it's interesting for a couple of reasons. One would think that if these ruptures are going to happen, they're going to happen sooner rather than later, but we know that's not the case because intermittently, all of us see these really delayed ruptures. And two, she was really unhappy with the position of her thumb. I wonder whether if this happened to me, would I have the tendon transfer? Because retropulsion of the thumb might be important, but general function I think would be good. She was really unhappy and she articulated her unhappiness well. She just didn't like the fact that she had trouble getting her thumb out to grasp things and just didn't like the resting position. What have you heard from patients in these situations?
So in classic Goldfarb manner, two things. So I agree that it is the timing is weird. I've seen more delayed ruptures on the flexor side than the extensor side. And then the second one is that I've seen one patient who had an ultrasound confirmed EPL rupture and was no, I'm good. Like I don't, it doesn't bother me. Like I offered him a tendon transfer and he has not come back. So I don't know if he went and had it somewhere else, but he seemed very content with the function of his thumb.
Yeah, I've seen the same. I mean, I had a few patients with the same. Most of them want it fixed, and obviously we enjoy doing that surgery. It's fun, um, and generally has a good outcome. Although it's not normal, and I do stress that you have to overtension it a little bit to start, and it's a really interesting process. Do you? So when I do this, I always take the plate out, and some might argue that you don't need to. Um, I don't necessarily explore where the screw may have caused a problem. And that, I don't know, maybe that speaks to my intellectual curiosity or lack of. But in this case, I took out the plate, I did the EIP to EPL transfer and stopped there. How do you think about these, or do you do it the same?
I think if I was concerned about the plate causing further issues, it would be a definite take out the plate situation. But if the plate is well positioned, the flexors aren't at risk, I probably would just end up offering a wide awake tendon transfer. And because I was awake, I wouldn't plan on taking the plate out, although I know you can do the plate awake. Do you think doing it, the tendon transfer awake adds anything to the tendon transfer?
Well, it's a great question. To me, the unknown remains unknown whether you do this in typical anesthetic fashion or wide awake, and that is retensioning the retracted EPL tendon slash muscle belly is going to take some time to equilibrate. And so, yes, you can certainly do this awake, and you will feel better about it immediately, but I don't think it guarantees you a different outcome because the newly applied tension on the EPL is going to loosen it over time.
And how do you rehab these patients? How long do you immobilize the tendon transfer, and then what are you typically asking your therapy colleagues to help with?
So it's a great question. And I think I'm a little wimpy on this. I feel like I'm not wimpy on some things, but I think I'm a little wimpy on this one. I tend to go 4 weeks or so immobilized. That is a surgical, dressing / splint and then a cast. But I have a pulver weave, which I really feel good about. And I don't think there's any reason I couldn't start therapy at 2 weeks. I actually discussed that with this patient, and she wasn't comfortable with that. So we're going to cast for 4 weeks and then start therapy. And then the first few weeks of therapy will be active motion, both directions, no passive flexion. And then once you get to about 8 weeks, kind of anything.
Yeah, it sounds like you're just letting patients run your practice. She's making all your decisions for you.
Yeah, I like it. It's just easier on me.
The old shared decision making. That's not really shared. She's just calling the shots.
She was that kind of patient.
I didn't realize you were practicing in New York City.
Yeah, well, my gosh, isn't that the truth?
Well, it's a fun time of year because we're getting into fellowship interview season. I know that there are some programs that have already done their interviews, and I thought it'd be good if we just talked about kind of approaches to this, because it's, for at least hand surgery, it's virtual for a second year in a row. Which I think most of us have figured out kind of how to do a good job at this. But you've also been participating in residency interviews, and I think you're doing the PEDS fellowship interviews virtually too. I mean, what have been your experiences so far this year, and how has it been different from last year?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a lot of thoughts to share. Maybe we can just start general and then we can dive in. The first thing is, and I'm sure you feel the same way, this is hard. It's hard on applicants, even though we should talk about the advantages. And I do think those are real and should not be overlooked, but it's hard on applicants. It's hard on interviewers. It's hard to make a connection, which is more easily made in person. I get why we're doing it this way. And the decision in retrospect was the right one, given Omicron. This decision was made 6 months ago, and it was the right one. So I think the challenge for everyone involved is creating a connection, and that's just not easy.
So I'm trying to figure out how we can connect with applicants and how they can help connect with us. I mean, what have you found? Maybe I'll talk about it from the applicant perspective, but can you talk about what's worked for us in terms of the fellowship and the residency, in terms of us getting across the screen and showing people who we are?
Well, I like what you have done, and I like what the residency has done. And that is a couple of things. Number one, I think this increases the importance of having a great web presence in general. So website and associated pages is incredibly important, so that the interested resident or fellow applicant already has a sense of the program. And that's a real important message, I think, is that we will pick up on whether the applicant has done his or her homework. I mean, let's be honest, that's what it is. But it is a job interview, and your understanding of the program is important to convey, not in our face kind of way, but it's important to convey. But it's also important for you to have that baseline information. And so the web page is important. And some of these pre-interview day opportunities, I think, are great, because again, they get some of the mundane out of the way. So conversations that we might have over Zoom over a quote unquote cocktail hour. We've been doing those for all the specialties. And I think, honestly, Chris, it was you who started that, have been really successful and effective, and just kind of dial it down a notch, so that there's a better baseline understanding, which facilitates better conversations during the interview.
Yeah, we wrote a review article that was in JHS. I think it came out on kind of optimizing virtual interviews. So, Caroline Granger went through that process for residency last year, so I asked her to lead it. And even looking at the literature that's out there, it's clear applicants are looking at websites more, they're relying on websites more, and rightfully so, which means us on the program side, we need to have good content. That is having at a bare minimum a serviceable and up-to-date website with information about the program, but then take it to the next level of here's why we love our program, here's what it's like to live in our city, here's what our residents and fellows think. And I had a lot of fun recording alumni interviews last year, just kind of asking them about what made the program great and then editing that down. It was a fun process. I think from an applicant side, one thing that I don't think enough people do ahead of time, they reflect on it after the interviews, but what are you really looking for in a program? Like, what are your priorities? And I guess I'm old school, but writing it down and saying, like, here are the things that I want to get out of my year of training for fellowship. And here are the things that I'm a little more flexible about. What are my non-negotiables? What are the things that I can bend a little bit on? And how can I ask my questions and learn about this program to match those needs?
Super important, especially in the Zoom era, because you have to be more direct to get the information. And when I say you, the applicant needs to be more direct to get the information that they need. And so let's be honest, there are a number of really good fellowships, and there are a large number where a fellow can have a great year and learn what they need to learn. But excellence in a fellowship varies based on the eye of the beholder and what that fellow really wants. And there are differences at every tier of fellowship. And so you're right. You need to look yourself in the mirror as an applicant and be honest about what is important to you, whether that's how much call or, how crazy intense it is, or micro or plexus or congenital. Be honest with what you want, or at least you think you want. And that helps you go into these interviews and the interview season eyes wide open.
Yeah, I think one of the practical tips that I give residents as they're applying for hand fellowships, at least, is I think 2 ways that you can whittle down programs are, do you want to do shoulder in your fellowship training? And then do you want to see peds in your fellowship training? Because some programs are very heavy on shoulder, and if you spend, yes, some people say it's only a rotation or two, but if that ends up being a quarter of your fellowship, and then you go out and practice and you don't want to do any rotator cuffs, perhaps that time would have been better spent on learning other things. Now, granted, there are principles you can learn from those cases that you can apply to any hand surgery or extremity practice. But I think that's one practical thing that I've advised our applicants to use in the past.
It's great advice. It's absolutely relevant. What's so hard, though, is that it's a rare applicant who has any clue where he or she is going to go into practice in their career. That would be ideal. If you knew you were going to X or Y job that had this expectation of you, that would be great. Failing that, then a broad-based education is helpful. I would think that the vast majority of jobs for hand fellows do not prioritize shoulder, simply because shoulder and elbow surgeons and sports surgeons are in good supply. And so there are exceptions that want an entire upper extremity surgeon, typically smaller groups and less congested areas. But I think your advice is good, just like your advice is good about peds. I personally believe peds has more generalizable lessons, but peds, micro, plexus, and shoulder are the areas that will not appeal to everyone.
Yeah, I think you probably think peds applies to everything. I mean, I can't. I'm trying to think of a good story so that I could use my peds principles. But I think that one thing about, even if you're not going to do, say peds or plexus or whatever, I think it's just being around people that are so into something, like, and have a passion for it. And you can learn lessons in that regard in terms of how to, for example, if somebody comes here and doesn't want to do any plexus, maybe they've learned something about, the way that David and I have set up the program and the research and everything. Maybe there's something to learn from that. But I think that it is, trying to get the most out of every experience. You talked a bit about, the applicants looking in the mirror. I think one of the steps that we took as a fellowship a couple of years ago was for us to look in the mirror and truly proactively try to understand our values, our goals as a program, and establish a vision. And I think that was a useful exercise for us as a group to go through to really say, hey, who are we? And then that helps us say, what kind of fellows do we want here?
It was incredibly important. And, the goal of this whole process is to really get a good match. We don't want a fellow here who was deceived in some way, or who didn't understand who we are and what we are about. We want a fellow that is excited to be here for sure, wants to make the most of a single year of additional training, and really just is kind of drinking through a fire hose, because you and I believe that's what we have to offer. There's so much to learn in that 1 year, that we want the fellow to be all in on all aspects of it. And if they are, it's a great year for everybody. I mean, let's be honest, we hope to train future academicians, but more important than that is training great people that are going to do a great job and carry forward principles they have learned, or at least solidified in fellowship, onto their practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when we talk about, the kind of fellows that we want to train here, for at least our program, we were very interested in training leaders. Doesn't necessarily mean researchers, people involved in societies, whatever, but leaders in their respective areas in terms of where they're practicing, and I think that's been a big charge for us. I think that, from an applicant perspective, or to give some advice to applicants, so not only look at yourselves in the mirror, but try to look at programs that truly understand who they are and who they want to be and who they want to train. Because I think having that clarity of vision, at least if it comes across in the interview stage, that means that you're going to have a great year if you end up there, because they're organized. And I think that that's another thing that, from a program side, was highly emphasized by applicants is the need for organization in the day. And I read a AAOS Now article that was written by Charlie Wilson. So I know Charlie listens to the podcast. So hi, Charlie. He matched at Mayo for his fellowship and is starting next year. And he went through the virtual interview process and gave some really great tips on kind of practical things from the applicant perspective, like not waiting around in a room for a long time, condensing the schedule, and then also having enough time to really sit and talk unfiltered with the current fellows.
Yeah, those fellow conversations are critical, because you're going to get a fellow-centric perspective, and we hope that matches the attending view of the world, but doesn't always. And so I think that's important. The other thing which I believe is really important is how an applicant views mentorship and views kind of how they might connect with future mentors. And that's just incredibly important. The hand world is small. The hand society and the annual meeting is pretty small. And the connections you make during your fellowship year with your co-fellows, which you cannot choose, but with your faculty, which you do choose, is just so important. And really trying to see who you connect with as an applicant, who you might connect with, is if not the most, is certainly one of the most important things, at least from my perspective.
I don't know about you. I remember a lot of people that we interview for fellowship. Obviously, we don't match all of them, but I remember a lot of the conversations. And you're saying, it's a very small world. You will see everybody again. And it's great to at least have made that initial connection. And I mean, I'm not saying to interview at multiple programs just to network, but that's definitely a nice benefit.
Yeah, and the opposite's true. It's a bummer of a loss not to be able to see the fellowships in person, and see kind of the environment, because you do get more of a sense, without a doubt, of kind of how programs work when you're in the office and in the home environment. But you know what, it is what it is, and we all have to make the best of it.
So it's interesting. I think that when we presented, or we had this article, Dan Osei contributed, and he gave us some data that was presented at the Hand Fellowships Directors meeting in October at the Hand Society. And when they issued a survey about virtual interviews after last year's cycle, 80% of applicants said that they would prefer staying virtual. Because I think it gives them, there are some nice advantages for the applicant, especially cost, which is, applying to fellowships is crazy expensive with all the travel. So that's big. And I think that maybe perhaps there's nothing that stops an applicant from doing a look at the city on their own, outside of the formal fellowship, interview. So if you're curious about what it's like to live in, a certain place, just go check it out if you can, obviously COVID permitting.
Good points. I mean, there's so much to learn virtually about a city, about an institution, obviously about a training program. You're right. I mean, maybe this is here to stay. It's easier for a fellowship because it's just 1 year. Residency being 5 years does sort of increase the magnitude of the decision for virtual interviews. But I don't know that this is wrong for the future. It'll be very interesting to see what happens with this process. What should we talk through how you think like practical tips on the actual interview?
Yeah, I was actually where I was going to go next. I mean, I think that, the practical things from the applicant perspective, this sounds silly, but treat a virtual interview like a regular interview, like an in-person interview. So, however you prepare yourself for that, the easy one to say is to wear pants, but, clearly prepare yourself as if you were doing an in-person interview. Get yourself in that zone. Now, I guess, perhaps everybody's feeling a little too comfortable on Zoom stuff, but you really gotta, present the right energy. There are practical things like making sure that your lighting is set up appropriately, checking all your AV stuff, and your internet connection, because while it shouldn't, those little technical hiccups will affect the interview itself and how people perceive the experience on both sides. So for example, if we're running behind on our schedule, that's going to tick off a lot of people and not reflect well on us. But if you have an internet connection that keeps cutting in and out on an applicant side, that's not going to help them.
I think that's really well said. And actually, while if you're watching us on YouTube, you can appreciate this. My lighting right now is terrible. I have kind of yellow light. If this was an interview, I would have different lighting. Lighting matters. Sound matters. Your background matters. And we can try to overlook those things, but we're humans, right? And we're going to be interviewing a large number of people. And when someone pops, when you have them on the screen, you just start off at a different level, as opposed to if someone is dark and hard to hear and crappy background, then you start off at a different level. Yeah, you can make it up or you can lose the advantage either way, but get those basics right.
Yeah, there are a lot of resources just in the general kind of lay literature about, how to present yourself well on a virtual interview. So, and you don't have to get anything super expensive. It's just about where you position yourself and how you have the lighting and all that kind of stuff. So yes, sounds silly, but those things do make a difference. Do you have any tips on the actual interview itself?
I do. Like the stupid stuff such as lighting, energy matters. And it matters more in a virtual interview to me, because just it's harder to make an impression over a computer screen than it is in person. And so, you have to not go crazy with over the top, but you have to bring energy and some type of dynamic interaction when you do the interview. You have to. And it's not in everyone's DNA to do that. But being upbeat, being ready to ask questions when you have a chance to, kind of engaging, leaning forward rather than leaning back and kicking your feet up. I mean, those things are just the nonverbal cues tell us a lot, and we try to do the same thing. And so those things matter as well.
Yeah, I think that one tip that's super important, and again, it seems kind of routine, but practice. Especially, it's so easy to practice now with virtual interviews. I mean, you can get anybody on the Zoom, but do some mock interviews, because you want there are questions that you're going to be asked, like, why do you want to be a hand surgeon? That's at least going to come up one time during your interview, and you need to have an answer that it's rehearsed to the point where it no longer sounds rehearsed. Because you have this kind of inflection point where after a while it's like, okay, you got it down. It sounds like you're giving a speech. But then after you've answered it a few more times, then it's just genuine. And I think that, there are a certain number of questions you're going to be asked throughout the process. As long as you have really answered those questions a number of times and practiced them, they're going to come across really well.
Yeah, this process should cause healthy introspection and self-reflection. It's a good thing. It's a good thing for all of us. And having processed the likely questions in advance can only help you. And as Chris said, I could not agree more. Interview skills can be obtained through practice without a doubt. And it's just repetition. I'll say the other thing is, this is going to sound weird, the answer doesn't always matter. What you verbalize, of course it matters. But if you get thrown a question out of left field and you are totally thrown off, if you hem and you haw and you stutter and you just can't get an answer out, that's not good. But if you get an answer out that's at least somewhat reasonable, that's okay. Because we don't often remember, unless you say something outlandish or do something outlandish, kind of the intermediate answers don't really phase, at least me. So I think be prepared in a general sense and give a politician's answer sometimes if you can't give a better answer.
So I think that, in addition to, things that the applicants can work on, I think us on the program side, we need to be better about the questions we ask. Especially in a 10-minute interview, you can chew up all the time just kind of saying, well, this person at that place, let's talk about that person. Like that's been the temptation because that's the easier thing to do. And I'm going to try this year again for us to use standardized questions, but this year try to have those standardized questions really reflect the values that we're looking for in our program and in our applicants, the people that we want here. Because I think that we have such a small amount of time to try to understand and get to know somebody that we waste it by just saying, well, you got any questions? And that, honestly, that's one thing that will tick off an applicant, is that if we haven't read their application, we don't know them, we don't try to get to know them in the interview, and we just take the easy way out.
Really well said. It's always been a curiosity to me, and I don't want to say frustration, although it should be probably, that if there are 6 10-minute interviews, they shouldn't all go exactly the same way, because then it's just, what's the point? And so I like when there's a focus or a particular question that one interview room will ask, information to be gleaned from me versus you versus others. I think that's really important. And, we will be prepared and we will all have read every application more than once. It's just a learning and it's a familiarity process, but really, I like your point a lot.
So as we draw things to a bit of a close, is there anything that that you think programs should be doing that we're not doing now to kind of push us forward and help us interview better?
It's what you just mentioned. It's not just setting up interviews and telling the faculty to go get them and meet all these applicants and make your list. It's far more than that. It is a more complex organization about what we need to learn to give us the best chance of having the best fit. And so preparation and real thought on our side is critical.
Can I ask one silly question, which I know nobody has a perfect answer for this. How can an applicant show that they've done their homework without putting it in your face? Because then, you inevitably will have, applicants say, oh, Dr. Goldfarb, I read your 18 million papers on so-and-so, and, so how do you have the right amount of it, show that you did your homework, ask insightful questions without totally fanboying over Chuck Goldfarb? Yeah,
and fanboying is okay. No, I'm just kidding. It's not. Nothing makes me less comfortable than that. It's if
yeah, you still won't sign my book.
If you have a question, if you have an opportunity to ask a question, to me, that's the best way. So if I were interviewing with you, I might ask, hey, Dr. D, when I'm doing a nerve, or when I'm doing a plexus with you and we bring the microscope in, how do you think about teaching me to be as successful as you are? It's maybe that's even too much, but it doesn't have to be in depth. It doesn't have to be in 1999 you wrote your first paper. That's crazy, but it just needs to reflect a general sense of who we are. If you get too specific, it gets awkward, I think.
Yeah, I think it's probably about right. So, I will, shameless plug here. I really like the virtual interview article that we wrote. It's available. I think it's actually online for free. It might be free on the JHS website. I thought it was fun for us to put together, and I think it does have some useful tips. So as we are doing in this season, Chuck, why don't we close with either a win or a loss? We're adding the loss just because you shared an L last time. So
You go first this time.
I'm so predictable. The things in my life are outside of hand surgery or you hanging out with the family, working out, and cooking, usually all in the same day. So I recently hit my 900th ride on the Peloton, which was fun. And then I made an amazing cornbread focaccia yesterday, which I'm not a baker, but we were having some people over and to watch some football, and it felt like a nice thing to do. And I also made a soup, which I usually don't make soup, and it was a nice little lunch.
Well, gosh, I think this is the first time I've heard football and cornbread focaccia mentioned in the same sentence.
Yeah, it's total. Yeah, it's not wings and nachos because we had that the day before. So I wanted to do something a little bit lighter.
This is an upscale invitation only event, clearly. Written
We're
invitations.
we're only hanging out with one family, so yes, it is an invitation only.
All right, here's my win. Here's my win. We are, can I say this on, can I say this? We are trying to do a better and more comprehensive job as a department and as a hand division with organized rounds. In the past, rounds have been somewhat haphazard, sometimes really haphazard. But
Meaning non-existent.
I didn't say that. I didn't even think that. But we're trying to do better. So on Saturday morning in the snow, I came in and had organized rounds with one of our junior residents, Michelle. She did a wonderful job. And it was actually, in a weird way, enjoyable. It's like, it was old school. I felt like it was in medical school. And we rounded on, it wasn't that many patients, 6 patients on different floors. And I was trying to be the good attending where I didn't have her pre-round and then round with me and then post-round. And it ended up being kind of somewhere in the middle. But I liked it. It's weird to say I liked it.
I rounded the prior weekend, and I got in there, helped change some dressings. We were just having a good old time. It definitely felt it's been something I haven't engaged in as much since ending training, and we're fortunate enough to have a big group where it's going to be. I think we'll still view it with novelty.
Yes, I hope we have this conversation in a year and are still enjoying it.
Yes, exactly. So remember back then when Chuck and Chris enjoyed rounding? So anyway, enjoy your day of cases. I'm gonna go take down a Christmas tree.
Have fun with that too. Thank you.
All right, see you.